Hi everyone, my name is Maria, and welcome to the Mom series, The Misunderstanding of Multiplicity, what used to be called The Misunderstanding of Me, and I changed the channel name to the Mom series, The Misunderstanding of Multiplicity. The actual channel name in the beginning, when I first came out in 2007, was called Sensory Overload, and I spoke about the myths, the misconceptions, the folklore, the legend, the stigma and fear that was perpetuated very often by the media, and I looked at all forms of media. So I started my channel in 2007, and I named it the Mom Series, The Misunderstanding of Me, and that was just an acronym for that, but the most important acronym of my life because it acrostic acronym, whatever you want to call it, because it summed up what I was and what I lost to the stigma, fear, and myth and folklore and legend of a very misunderstood condition for some, experienced for others, fleeting for just a time for some, remission for others, manageable for some, functional, high functioning, and not so functioning, disordered at times. So, a condition that begins often through trauma and before our personality usually is developed completely. So pre-verbal to 5 years old, 6, although we know now that, that trauma is trauma is trauma. So I've said often on my channel that what makes one person fear for their life and go to a hiding place in their mind and create what they need and self-soothe and disassociate can be something that becomes perfectly natural and normal and okay and fly off the shoulder. Then they don't even, it's not trauma for them. So there are degrees of trauma. Years ago when I was diagnosed with multiple personality, MPD, it was 1986. I had been being treated from high school for post-traumatic stress, which the social worker and psychologist at high school called war fatigue. And I was told that I was war fatigued, like the Vietnam veterans that come home from war, because my home was like a war zone, and it was. So I grew up in very turbulent, scary home environment, although I had beautiful parents that I love with my whole soul and heart. Now, I take a different approach to what I believe about multiple personality and dissociative identity disorder and repressed trauma and how we can go back and recover it and what it all means in the now. And so I thought I would read a little bit, one, from a book called The Myth of Insanity by Martha Stout, psychologist. It was a very popular book in 2002 that helped me grasp. There's been many books that have helped me grasp living with DID, dissociative identity disorder, what used to be called multiple personality disorder. I was diagnosed officially in 1986. I didn't believe it. I wasn't somebody that was looking for a diagnosis. I knew that I was going through a lot at the time. My gynecologist obstetrician said, you know, it's been a tough few years for you. And he knew me from 12 years old, from when I was a child. And I had had many procedures, DNCs. I had my first DNC when I was 12. He knew my home environment. He knew that I'd been through a lot, physically and emotionally. And he was a safe person that I could speak to. And I remember having a lot of pelvic and back pain and leg pain. And there was a very good physical reason for it. But at one point I just said to him, I'm just reacting to everything. I don't even know. I'm just reacting to everything. And he said, why don't you go get a little bit of therapy? 6 weeks. I was like, I went to a social worker when I was younger. I'd been this route. My mother was a psychiatrist. She was in a state hospital. We had family counseling. No. And at the time, I was going back to school to be a social worker myself. So I was like, more analysis. So I said, look at it as a learning opportunity for you to work with your clients and just go have somebody, a sounding board or whatever. And I did. I went to therapy. And when I entered therapy, my therapist already had a note from my gynecologist obstetrician, which was very clear, that said a lot of background history that was documented very well, corroborated, physical evidence of, and lots of pediatric records too. And he included a lot of his dialogue with me too. And that's when doctors really talk to each other back then, instead of going on a little, computer thing and looking for a note that may or may not. And they actually pick up the phone and talk to each other. So they didn't text into a little talk to each other. So a therapist I knew had to come to this with objectivity, and I really did not want to go. And so what happened was I was in school, in college, and I had another one of these anxiety, which later people called panic attacks. I was just burning the candle at both ends. I was going to school, I was working, I was raising my kids, and it should have been the best time of my life. I was divorced, and I was finally going into the career I wanted, and my kids were growing up, and other than trying to figure out how to find a babysitter all the time and pay for a babysitter, I was on the right track, because at that time we did not have daycare in colleges, but I got to that right away and organized the first daycare in a local college I went to, Monroe Community College. Through Newman Community Center, I said, we need a daycare. There are too many single women here that have no daycare. And we're going crazy. And it's there now, and I'm glad for that. Anyway, so I kind of like poo-pooed the therapy and put it on a back burner, and just kept being busy and telling myself, you will sleep tonight, you will read so many chapters in your books, you will do your homework, you will eat well and go to sleep at a good time and wake up at a good time, and not drink too much coffee and not smoke too many cigarettes, and you will get out the door in time and everything will be fine. And it wasn't. And I was ridiculously thin at that time. I was probably about 89 pounds. And I was in my 30s. And I did not have anorexia. I just was crispy toast. What I didn't know at that time was I was hyperthyroid. I know that now. It's very important when you're going into therapy to first check your thyroid. I can't be more clear about this. Everyone, if your heart is racing and you're having panic and anxiety and all of that, and you enter into therapy and nightmares and sweating and nausea and puking and stomach and gut problems, please get your thyroid checked. If you're extremely depressed, low energy, cold, can't get out of bed, can't focus, hyperthyroid can feel like bipolar 2. You're on a roller coaster all over the place and you can't get anything done. Okay? And your metabolism is so sped up that you are just shriveling up. And then And then what goes up must come down, and the thyroid will do the same thing. So then you go hypothyroid, and whatever you eat, whether it be a lettuce leaf or whatever, it'll all of a sudden you'll be blowing up again. And I need enough to be this big. What's going on? And you just don't have any energy because you just ran yourself ragged. All right. Well, I was on that roller coaster, and I didn't know it until 2015. So I went all through therapy from one doctor to another, and one thing that was never checked was my thyroid until I started to have obvious nodules that were noticeable. And even then, I was told my thyroid was normal until it wasn't. So it it fluctuates. So please, please, please get your thyroid checked. All that said, this one panic attack led me to the college counselor who was a counselor that was teaching abnormal psychology, and I believe he taught a course in forensic psychology. I was taking two of them, and uh, I had at the end of my class, I was just my hands were shaking. I had just had a panic attack, and I was just a mess. And he knew something was up with me, and we talked, and same therapist name came up. And he said, I have a friend. He works over at the U of R in the Lattimore Hall. He works with the doctors. He works with the nurses, the colleagues. If people are if students or doctors are, just burnt to crispy toast and need a little, R&R or something or just figure out what they're reacting to. Maybe they're getting triggered with procedures they're having to do with patients or whatever. He said, no, go talk to me. And lo and behold, it was the same doctor's name that was on the list that my obstetrician gynecologist had given me. So I thought, okay, this is now too weird, so I'm going to make the appointment, keep it. I went, and I ended up staying in therapy for 38 years. This is an anniversary month for me, and my life blew up, and I would have to say I blew it up myself during the therapy process, moving way too fast to try to get way too healed. And I just wanted to know everything too quick. And just hurry up and get better, because I had watched my mother go through mental health problems and spend her life suffering, and I was like, oh, no, this is not getting in my way. It's not running me over. It's not taking my life. I'm going straight for the healing and the recovery. So anything I could find to heal and recover, I went to, especially therapy. If it was one time a week at the beginning or 2 times a week, it became 3 times a week. It became double sessions. It became nights after work. It became lunches while I worked. It became before classes. If I had a 8 o'clock class, he could meet me at 7. I got in as much therapy time as I could, and I thank God for him. Okay. Now, he was not a therapist that was looking for multiple personality or just what we call dissociative identity disorder, but he was acutely aware that I had post-traumatic stress right away. So we started working on that. We started working on fear. Okay. He had some notes that my school social worker had written that he felt like he was meeting many different Marias and that I was very far removed from the actual events that I was living through in my household from a young child, that I often reported stoically, like a war veteran would, the events that occurred that were very traumatic with no feeling. So I had a disconnect between feeling and the events. I just reported it with no emotion. So that led me into therapy and down the path of why am I not connected to the events that I know happened to me, people in my family, in different houses, my nuclear family, why am I not reacting while I'm calmly telling you this just occurred, but then overreacting everywhere else to things that were reminding me of that? Okay, triggers, enter triggers, not flashbacks, triggers. It wasn't until later on that I finally had a flashback. Once I was into therapy for a while, that I had a flashback. And I had always had this memory, but it came out of nowhere with complete feeling. And that was the beginning of my healing. So I wanted to talk about all the different tools and books over the years that have assisted me in that and tell you where I am now. Being diagnosed with multiple personality was the most horrible thing that could ever happen. I was terrified. Imagine being told, you have other personalities, they're really part of you. You developed with them, you created them because you needed them to survive awful trauma that you're not really remembering. And I would interrupt and say, but I do remember. And I would be told, but you disconnected from the worst parts of it. And another part has that rest of that memory. So imagine wanting to fill in the blanks, to complete that puzzle, to hurry up and get well, to push through, find the answers, and why, what to all of it, and just get to feeling better and functioning better. Imagine how hard a person would try to find a meaning for everything, a purpose, and the event that created that. Okay. And that is what The Courage to Heal, a book that was very much the Bible of recovery and still is. Many counselors are still using The Courage to Heal by Ellen Bass and Laura Davis. The book developed from a backlash of the 60s and 70s where women were not taken seriously and just thrown into insane asylums and, all kinds of stuff. And it really promoted storytelling through healing. It also promoted chasing vague instincts and hunches in your memory and nightmares and things, reoccurring themes. Okay, so it encouraged journaling, which is always good. It encouraged going and looking for the trauma. And if you could not fill in the dates, the time, the specifics, looking for a part, aspect, or alter that could. Because some part of you that survived disassociated and had the part of that event, so you needed them. Okay? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that because that is part of the trauma model of putting together your memories. But I will say this. Back in 2010, I did an interview on healthyplace.com, which is a advocacy mental health website. And they had a TV show that came out with the host of the show, Gary at the time, and Dr. Harry Croft, who is a expert in the field of trauma and dissociation, interviewed me. And they had never interviewed anyone that really had been diagnosed and had been living with dissociative identity disorder, or MPD. So I got the ball rolling. That seems to be my course in life, is get the ball rolling out on YouTube, get the ball rolling on healthyplace.com, and then other people come and bring their videos, their stories, and go on from there. I did my interview. They United States of Terra TV show had just come out. Christine Torres, a producer at healthyplace.com, had been watching my videos, and she said she needed a woman that was very much like the person in United States of Terror, where it was a mom, a regular person who went to college, was a mother, was working, and then not working, and blogging and vlogging, and she had been watching my videos, and to know, let's look at the realness of it. And just like Leah Peterson had been an advocate, uh, and been a special writer for helping Diablo Cody with Showtime with the United States of Terror, which hoped to end stigma and help people take a kind of like a, a dramedy, dark humor approach to how we all are a little crazy. Some of us just show it a little more than others. We all have our quirks, and we all have our past problems that we have to work through in the now. So I was one of those people. She got in touch with me. She said, "Can you do a interview?" I did, and immediately after that, I was worried that my children would and my family would be sad about it. Even though I had been doing YouTube, I had been keeping that devoted to the focus of the media and how United States of Terror was not like what multiple personality was. Sybil Dorset was not, the story of Sybil was not like how it is with multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder. Three Faces of Eve was not like all these shows. I was reviewing shows and books and music and all of it, and debunking myths and trying to get rid of the stigma. And within a couple of years, my kids were pursuing relationships. They were grown. And I asked healthyplace.com to take my video down, which I will regret for the rest of my life. It's archived, but it's not available. The show notes are there. But Dr. Harry Croft wrote a blog about Maria originally started with us in 2009 and told what it's like to live with DID every day and the stigma, because that is my concern, the stigma. Because if somebody tells you you have personalities that can come out when you're sleeping and go drive your car and go spend all your money in your checkbook and go do whatever, what do you think you're going to do to keep track of yourself? I did it. I stayed awake all night. I stayed awake and wrote down, I am still here. 2:00 in the morning. I am doing this. 2:10. I am still here. I mean, I want you guys to think about that. What you're asking people to believe is that you have no control over the body. That if you've been diagnosed with multiple personality or DID, what we were asked to believe was that we could be driving and someone else could take over and we could end up in another city. We could not come home. Our kids would be home waiting for us and we wouldn't show up. How vulnerable does that make us to be blamed as things we didn't even do? Anybody could say anything about us. We were vulnerable. And that was the stigma. And it was feared that if you acted different, talked different, walked different, used a different hand, was more outgoing than normal, that you were having an amnesic event. And we know that in therapy, they taught us the opposite. They taught us that you need to get together with your alters and talk to them and share time, space, and experiences in your life and negotiate, share. Now we only have one mouth on the body. So how many people can be talking at once? Once we're flowing together and co-running, it can be so fluid that I could be talking to you right now and go right into a whole different add-on to the conversation, which is why conversations can get long with multiples often and circular. There's one more opinion. There's one more opinion. I say something and another aspect, persona, part of me can come right along back and add on to it. Like, well, another perspective. So we are more than one in one body. If we develop that way during trauma and that was our normal personality that developed that way, they're not just defense mechanisms, they are now our personality. They are they are cemented into our personality and they are not bad. They suit us to function. And without them, we don't make sense. And I want to talk about that this year. But I want to talk about the real problem with this book was that it had a lot of women chasing after repressed memories and holding hands and storytelling and curling up in a fetal position and, doing artwork to try to find altars and journaling to try to find altars and all these things to find the other hidden parts of you and all the trauma, right? And then accusing the people or divorcing yourself from an entire family and not allowing your children or yourself to be around that family because why? Because you don't have to say why. And nobody could interrogate you and nobody could ask you, just, you did this to me and I don't have to tell you, you know what you did and I don't want to be around you. And you can't say nothing to me. And in this, even though that wouldn't stand up in a court of law because you would have to have some kind of evidence, proof, something, they twisted it to say, well, if you were doing a lawsuit and saying somebody did all this to me, you would have to have evidence to corroborate it. But during healing, you don't have to prove it because you're uncovering memory. You don't have to prove it. So now so it really led families to break up. It began the birth of the false memory association. And more than anything, it destroyed a lot of lives. It helped a lot of people find tools. This was not the intent of these women at all. Ellen Blass and Laura Davis. They were not clinically trained. They didn't know anything about memories, whatever. They wanted women to tell their stories. And there's a lot of story telling about sexuality here, and I want to talk about that for a minute. For a long time, during that feminist movement, there were women that were lesbian that just couldn't accept the fact that they were lesbian, and a lot of them blamed abuse for making them lesbian, and that's not a good reason to be a lesbian. And that's a whole nother video. But this gave them permission to. This gave women permission to say, my father, my brother, whoever, my cousin, my uncle, coach, whatever, it did this to me, and now I hate men. And I love women. Or my mother, my aunt, and that's why I'm a lesbian. So it went both ways. It was like I was sexualized that way, so that's why I'm a lesbian. And it really did not give a person, authentic personal accountability for why people were choosing their lifestyles they were or felt they were born that way. It was getting on a trauma to be something. So that was one agenda that was going on. The other agenda that was really, really weird were women would get together and tell their stories. There were tons of women that told their stories and retracted them later. And they were told that's the normal process of therapy. Like 10 years later, they came back and said, that never happened to me. I got caught up in this person's story and that person's, and it was like a whisper game in a circle, and I could relate to everything because I was like a sponge, and I already had the ability to create, and we all do. I already had the need to be approved, to get approval. I already was insecure and needy from what happened to me. So I ran with this story, and I didn't know all the facts. I didn't have all the facts. So because I didn't have all the facts, I didn't have all the reasons why what happened. Um, I filled in the blanks because I thought nobody would believe me if I didn't have a name, a person, and so much subliminally gets in our head from stuff we hear from family folklore. Um, for me, myself, I grew up with my mother's side of the family saying my father was the problem, and my father's side of the family saying, well, but your mother was sick and she was difficult. So both of them kind of went back and forth. And I kind of, as a kid, grew up thinking, I love both my parents, and they both have their problems. I could see those problems on display easily. But I love them. And if they're this way, something happened to them to make them this way. And I mean, I just always had that in me. I didn't want to demonize a parent or even anybody that hurt me. I didn't blame myself. Although when I was younger, I thought, what did I do? As I got older, I realized that just happened. And I was just there, and that happened. And always. And, uh, the turmoil was just there. And why? So I started searching for peace and joy in my life and healing and God and um, a more, a better way of living healthy. But all that revisited me, and everything I said will never happen in my life happened. My children ended up going to live with my cousins. I lost being a mother, years of being a mother to my kids. My daughter was 10 and a half. My son was 8.5, going on 9 when they went to live with my cousins. No judge removed them. But I knew, as a social worker, I knew as a trauma survivor that, and I knew as a mother, that I could not mother at that time. It didn't have to be forever. It could have been helped for a little while, but it became easier to stay in therapy because there was an end goal point, which went like this. Maria, if you can stay integrated for 3 months, it was just a little written thing that my cousins and I and my doctor had. If if I could stay integrated for 3 months, the kids could come back and live with me. If one child wanted to. So that set me up to really be in a constant war against myself to try to get integrated fast. I was always stressing to get better and to be consistent and not to do anything off course. This book here, although it was supposed to be healing and recovery, it just created more and more and more um, possible parts and aspects that, yeah. And the other thing it did was, like I said, if a woman came back and said, I'd like to retract what I said, that was part of the, what I want to say, what every clinician and counselor is taught is part of the disclosure, is that a woman will retract. That if a woman is raped, If a child is abused, male or female child, if a boy is raped, a woman is raped, a child is raped, but especially if a molestation, rape, something sexual and shameful and horrible happens, if you don't have all the detail, you will fill in the blanks and grow very uncomfortable knowing that's not what it was for all that to happen. No, that wasn't what it was. But you'll feel like you have to fill in the blanks in order to be believed. And this book gives you permission to fill in the blanks. But then, when you realize you filled in the blanks wrong and you want to retract, they'll tell you that's normal. It's a defense in therapy. You want to protect your parents. You want to protect the abuser. You don't want to look at the painful memory, so you're retracting. It's defense mechanism. So when Sybil Dorset came along to Dr. Cornelia Wilbur, Shirley Ardell Mason, and Sybil, after 10 years of being in therapy with her, and said, this didn't happen, that didn't happen, and I don't think I have all these personalities. I do them to, I don't know, to make you happy. Dr. Wilbur said, well, no, she's retracting, but it's a defense. Trudy Chase with the troops retracted. And Dr. Phillips knew that all abuse survivors retract. So it's written, and this is the iatrogenic thing, is it's written right into the recovery, is that the client will retract and deny. And that's a defense. So it did create Hysteria. Creating Hysteria by Joan Aocella. So it went from something like 7 people being diagnosed with multiple personality, dissociative identity disorder from repressed memories and assigning trauma to these alters, to 400,000. And most always, they were white women turning 30, around 30, Northern American, and could afford therapy, number one. And it was always the same thing. And by the late 90s, there were tons of lawsuits. So I said I was going to go over the book, and there are a lot of great grounding tools, but I'm going to continue on in my next video talking about why storytelling is good and why storytelling is bad. From young children, we grow up learning by storytelling and knowing the universe around us by folklore and storytelling and visuals and pictures. My next video, I want to really explore why we go back and we repeat the same stories over and over again, and why, if we're healing and recovering, why do we cling to our stories to retell our trauma? I also want to talk about why we are attracted to, scientifically, bad news. Why do we watch gory movies? Why do we like watching scary movies sometimes? Why have you and I watched the World Trade Center blow up every September 11th over and over and over again? Why do we go back and watch the insurrection that's going on right now and all the violence? Why do we go back and watch why can't we turn away from it? It actually excites our brain. It's the same reason we can't turn away from social media and getting a like, a heart, a ping. It does something to our dopamine. But after a while, it goes the opposite way. So for a while, we need to keep looking. but there's a lot to be said. I want to talk about that because that is what's going on in the recovery healing process. A lot of times we need to keep going back and talking about it and reliving it and cuddling up with it. And it's not the best at all, the best way to move forward. So I would say again, I would invite people to go to healthyplace.com. To most of you know her, but some of you may not. That are new to the multiple community or DID community. Holly Gray. After I left healthyplace.com, Holly Gray took over blogging, and there is a great article that says why Courage to Heal is not on her recommended reading list, and for the very same reason it's not on mine anymore. There was, for everyone that got healed from a couple of tools that you could find here and in any book, it caused more damage than good. Right. And then you can't read that one without reading Joan Aocella's book, Creating Hysteria. Right? Woman and Multiple Personality Disorder. Right? And it looks at the 80s and the 90s and then the history like I've looked at before. In the late 1900s, the Salpeter Hospital, Dr. John Martin, and all the doctors of the day that had celebrity patients that were muses. So the other book I would tell you to read with these is Asti Husteved, Hysteria in the 19th Century. Medical Muses. Asti Husteved, Medical Muses and Hysteria in the late 1900s. That's the other book you want to read with this. The one book I keep going back to, and I hope I can call it